If we do settle into something that is globally much more severe than we appreciate, oil will slide precipitously. Do you buy that?
In our 125 years that we've been in existence, we've been through a lot of big commodity price swings in the past, and we've managed to keep the business viable and manage through those. And in the case of ExxonMobil, we really have built the company to deal with these kinds of large corrections and still be viable and still be an important energy supplier today and for the future.
All right, two things you noticed from that interview. One, I had a much better toupee back then. The other was how calm Mr. Tillerson was in the face of what would be a swoon in oil prices, and something he would build on, try to capitalize on, by making oil production deals around the globe and pushing for fracking here in this country. To former Exxon Middle East advisor Suzanne Maloney on what she thinks that portends for a Secretary of State, Tillerson. Very good to have you. What do you make of the temperament that he would have for the job, leaving aside his ties to the Russian government and Vladimir Putin more specifically, but just the temperament he would bring to that job?
Well, my experience with Exxon gives me a lot of confidence that anyone who's come up through that company has a very strong ethical and moral compass, someone with an incredible work ethic, and someone who has a capacity to manage both a bureaucracy and a lot of crises around the world, even as he's looking to the long term. I think Rex Tillerson brings very relevant experience and exactly the kind of temperament one would like to see, particularly on a team that is emerging where we certainly do see some firebrands.
You know, we always look askance when it is a businessman who comes into an office like that, even though it isn't unusual. I mean, if you think about it, Robert McNamara, who ultimately became John F. Kennedy's defense secretary, was a Ford executive. And I could go on and on. We look maybe more at these ties when it involves Republicans. I don't know if that's just a perception issue. But they do bring a different mindset to the job, apart from being bureaucrats. Explain how that might help someone like Rex Tillerson.
Well, I think what someone like Rex Tillerson coming out of an industry like the energy industry brings that is quite different than potentially other executives who may come from the financial sector, or even President-elect Trump himself, who obviously has a real estate background. What Tillerson brings is a much more operational perspective. Anyone in the energy sector has to consider the real on-the-ground technical details of managing projects as well as securing business. And that kind of day-to-day reality of working in a variety of contexts and really looking at the hardcore fundamentals, the engineering of projects, all the way from wellhead to the gas pump, I think is in fact a really useful sort of rubric to bring to foreign policy issues.
Do you worry, as some of these Republicans I mentioned, Marco Rubio among them, but I could just as well include John McCain and Lindsey Graham, who are leery of his ties to Russia, to Vladimir Putin, that when we should be, they say, getting much tougher with Russia, much tougher with Vladimir Putin? Do you think it is in Mr. Tillerson's temperament to do just that?
Well, look, I think there are reasonable questions to ask of Rex Tillerson in a confirmation process about his experience in Russia, about his relationship with Mr. Putin. But what I can say as someone who has watched business people work in different parts of the world is that no one does business out of personal friendship. And certainly ExxonMobil is a company that is very committed to its principles, very committed to following the letter of U.S. law. And so my expectation would be that Tillerson understands just how tough it is to deal with the Russians, that he's managed to do business in a way that has involved mutual respect, but has not involved a compromise of principles, ethics, or law. And I think that that's a particularly useful point of view to bring to bear in these discussions in forming Russian policy.
All right. Suzanne Maloney, thank you very, very much.